Okay, so I just finished making and mostly mixing this beat, so let's start mastering it. You could probably get away with doing all of the mastering in one chain, but I kind of split it into two. But anyway, let's start on the pre-master chain. So the first thing I have is an EQ. So I'm cutting the low lows and the high highs. And I'm also kind of boosting the bass a little bit. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. Lately I've been doing this a lot, but it really depends on the track. Okay, the hats are a little bit loud, so I kind of want to quiet them down a little bit. Okay, so let's start. So I've got 3 instances of Maximus here, and on each one I'm going to be doing varying levels of compression. And so in this first instance, you'll see my bands are up here by the 3. Okay, up here by the 3, or I'm sorry, by the 9. And then in the next instance, they will be down by the 6, and then in the third one, they'll be down by the 3, and then on the master chain, I'll do it one more time, and it will be flat, which means it will be limiting in that case instead of compression. Yeah. So on this first instance of Maximus, my bands are really the important part. So on the first one, my low band is at 50 hertz and below, and my high band is at about 10K and above. And something else that's important is on each of my low bands, I am merging my signal by 10%, and then I'm doing the opposite on the highs. I'm separating it, meaning... Okay, so for this first one, I want to make sure that I'm getting at least my low band, which is 50 hertz and below. I want to make sure I'm getting at least to negative 8.7 decibels, and it looks like I am. I'm getting right up to that. I'm actually going to push just a little bit more. I'm getting a little bit of compression. In almost every other band, I am going to be level matching. Okay, something else I like to do is make the quietest stuff in this section even quieter, and that won't really affect most of this, but if I had some residual sound down here, that would kind of help take care of that. In this case, it doesn't look like I've got a lot of that. I can do it a little bit and just kind of reduce the volume of stuff in that range a little bit. And then I like to do the opposite. So basically anything that's louder in this range, I like to make it a little bit more loud. Use the expansion function down to mids, but the process will be basically the same. Okay, so I pushed this up by 1.8 decibels. So let's pull this back by 1.8 decibels. Let's go to the highs. Push this up 3.3 decibels. Let's pull it back by 3.3. Go to the master. I'm also not going to level match on the master because I'm not changing the balance. All right, now we're going to do that 2 more times, but the bands will be like moved in as we do it. So let's go to the second one. So instead of being down by the 50 hertz, now we're up by 175. And then instead of being by the 10K, we've brought this one in by the 5K. The process. Okay, so we push this up by 1.9. Let's pull this back by 1.9. Let's go to the mids. Push it up by 1.4. Pull it back by 1.4. Go to the highs. Okay, I pushed this up by 1.3. So let's pull this back by 1.3. Let's go to the master. Okay, and let's go to the third Maximus instance. Now this one I'm going to set the bands up a little bit differently. I'm going to solo the mid band. I'm going to solo the mid band. And then I'm going to come over to the bands and I'm going to move the bottom one until I don't really hear the kick or the 808 anymore. And then I'll move the top one until I don't really hear the hi-hats anymore. Okay, and then the process will basically be exactly the same. I push this up 1.3, so let's pull it back by 1.3. Mids. So I think I want my main snare to be a little bit louder. Turn it up here. And I'll turn this up here. Okay, so let's do a little bit of compression. Okay, so I've only pushed it up by 0.5, so let's pull it back by 0.5. And then something else I like to do is sometimes I like to make my main snare, main clap, just kind of stick out a little bit more. So I like to use the expansion function to kind of make the stuff that's, well, the loudest, just a little bit louder. So let's just push this up. And I like to set these bands up so that the expansion is basically only affecting the main clap or the main snare, as it is here. I'm kind of getting to the highs. Start by 0.8, pull it back by 0.8, go to the master. Okay, so that's all of our Maximus instances. Let's open up our patcher presets. So this first one is for stereo separation. And I'm taking the lows and putting them into mono, taking the highs, pushing them out to the sides, and you can kind of play with the middle ones to taste. Here I've got a mid-side EQ where I'm kind of cutting the bass frequencies off the sides and kind of boosting the like the bass frequencies a little bit. And then on just the mids, I've got a little bit of saturation as well as a small amount of limiting that's happening. Okay, on the mids, I also have an EQ that's cutting the low lows and the high highs again. And it looks like my main hats are coming in on the sides a little bit more than I want them to. So I'm going to go back to my main hat and I'm going to merge it just a little bit more than it already is. Okay, so the next thing in my chain is a wave shaper, which I have set up as a hard clipper, and I'm pushing an additional 5% of volume up into it, as well as chopping off a little bit of the top, like I said, using hard clipping. And then I'm also taking some of the stuff that's a little bit quieter and just ever so slightly giving it a boost in both volume and with a little bit of distortion. Okay, and when I do this, that gives me a little bit of extra headroom to push an additional 0.3 decibels of volume before my limiter actually starts doing hit the edges. Okay, so that's the pre-master chain. Now I'm going to come over to the master chain and put on my master chain right here, master preset. Okay, so the first couple of things I have are a limiter and some compressors. This compressor has these settings: slow attack, fast release, 3:1 ratio, threshold's being brought down about 10, and the gain is being pushed up a couple of, just 2 or 3 decibels. Sometimes I have this mixed all the way on like this, and sometimes I have it mixed halfway on. It really depends on the track. This is a pretty loud track as it is, so I might have this mixed halfway on, and then later on, if I need the track louder, I will mix this all the way on. And in fact, this other compressor, sometimes I might turn it off, and this may be one of those cases where I turn it off. But the settings on this compressor are kind of ridiculous. I've got 0 attack, a very slow release, but then my threshold is being brought down 30 decibels, and then I'm cranking up the volume by about 20 with the same ratio. And if this one is mixed all the way on, which it never is, it sounds like this, and it's going to be really loud, so if you're wearing headphones, I would turn the volume down. So that's way too much compression that's happening. And like everything is like whooshing in and out. So that's too much. So normally I have this mixed anywhere from 10% to completely turned off. In this case, I'm going to actually start with it turned off. And then later on, if I want a little bit of extra volume, I will turn this on and then mix it up to at most 15%. But I probably won't even go that high in this case. But yeah, so I may come back and adjust these and boost a little bit of volume later, but for now, I'm going to have them the way they're. And this is our last Maximus instance, and this is what I was talking about. So instead of doing varying levels of compression with this band, so by the 9, the 6, or the 3, now I'm flat, which means I'm limiting now instead of compressing, I believe. But the process will basically be the same, and I'm going to do the same thing I did for the third instance where I solo the midband and then move these in until I don't really hear the kick or the 808, and then until I don't really hear the hi-hat. Okay, so I pushed this up by 0.9 decibels. Let's pull it back by 0.9. So the mids. Pushed it up by 0.7. Let's pull it back by 0.7. And then I'm going to do the expansion thing again, and I'm going to do it quite a bit, because I really do want this to stick out more than it currently is. Let's go to the highs. So I push this up by 2.4, let's pull it back by 2.4. Go to the master. Okay. We have another patcher preset, which is doing the same thing, just with the stereo. And I'm doing this in small amounts as I go. You could probably get away with doing all this at once. I tend to push the volume into a soft clipper, and then I check my loudness with a loudness meter. But let's look at the soft clipper and see if, how much volume we think we can push. Looks like I could probably push about that much. So how much is that? One decibel. So let's start with 1. And then we'll check the loudness meter and see if that was too much or not enough, or, you know, whatever the case may be. So I'm going to put this after the soft clipper, and then I'm going to push 1 decibel. So I'm just coming over here, going to the post, pushing it up 1 decibel. It goes into the patcher preset, which doesn't really matter because it shouldn't affect the volume. And then it goes into the soft clipper, gets soft clipped, and then we should see it here. Okay, so let's check the loudness. So let's start it from a little bit further back. And then I'm going to run the Ulean loudness meter for a second so that we can see how loud we're getting. If you notice that I'm using this tool incorrectly, please let me know in the comments. I'm relatively new to using it. But I'm mostly looking at the true peak max, trying to make sure I'm not getting above 0. And then I'm looking at these 2 numbers to see how loud I'm getting in general, as well as, you know, in the short term. But mostly looking at this just to make sure I'm getting in the -8s, -9s, somewhere in there. So let's let this run. Okay, so it looks like we were about as loud as we wanted to, and notice how we got as loud as we wanted to, and I didn't even use this compressor at all, and this one is mixed halfway out. And even if it was all the way on, I'm only pushing a little bit extra gain anyway, so it's really not making a huge difference, if I'm being honest. But yeah, if I'm using this tool incorrectly, please let me know in the comments. Like I said before, what I'm mostly looking for, and I think I just mentioned this, but I'm not sure if I would have cut it out or not. But this never got above or to 0, so I'm not going to change the overall ceiling for my limiter at all. Otherwise, like if this got up to 0, I would go back to my limiter and I would reduce the volume of the whole track by, you know, 0.1 decibels or however much I need to, and then bring the ceiling down with it, and then play it again and make sure I'm not going above 0. And then if this number was, you know, too low, what I might do if my track is too quiet is I might come over to these compressors and mix them all the way on. Well, this one I might mix up to like 10 to 15%, and then I might go into the settings themselves and push a little bit extra gain. Something else I might do is push a little bit extra gain with my Maximus as well. Those are just a couple of things I could do, but in this case, I don't really need to do any of that because I got as loud as I wanted to. So now I'm going to turn this off because I don't need it anymore. And that's going to be about it. So yeah, if you have any questions about any part of this, you know, mastering process, feel free to put that in the comments below. Or if you noticed something that I can improve on, because I'm kind of a novice in general when it comes to mastering. I've just kind of learned on my own over time. Feel free to throw that in the comments as well. But yeah, let's let the beat ride for a second, and that will be it.